Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Chester. You know what I like to do on the show. I want to enlighten you. I want to inspire you. I want to empower you to become your best self. Now, Scripture reminds us that the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. Today, we want to get you fired up about the book Not Without a Fight. Its author is D.W.Duke, and I'm really excited to have him on today to talk about his book. Now, you know what I'm going to tell you to do. Go on, get comfy, get cozy, get your coffee or get your tea, because we are about to get started. Good morning, DW. Thank you so much for being on Daily Spark today.
Good morning, Angela. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
I'm so glad that you are. Now, before we get started, I always ask the same questions in the very beginning of each of my guests, because I do understand that there may be one or two people out there who are unfamiliar with you or with your work. So the question is, what makes you you? What do you feel has contributed to the person that you are today?
Well, I suppose I could go back to my childhood. I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I always wanted to do something unique with my life, possibly being a writer. And I went to University of Michigan for undergrad, graduated, went on to Washington University School of Law, and today I'm an attorney in California, and I do quite a bit of work in human rights and civil rights. And I'm also active in martial arts, Taekwondo primarily, and music as well. So what I do is I like to take stories, actual events, and write novels around them.
I love it. You are doing some really, really awesome things in your life. And I many times talk about, leaving a legacy and how you have touched the lives of others, and have you, tried to be that most awesome version of yourself. And I really and truly think that you are doing that, the work that you do with the kids and all of that. So thank you so much for sharing. Now, being an author, you kind of touched on that. Is that something that you found was a desire earlier in your life? Did it continue to blossom? Did you have a teacher that said, you should really look into it? Was there one thing that really got you involved in writing?
Well, that's an interesting question. I attended, when I was in elementary school, in our library, we had books about different people who were considered heroes, like Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett, George Washington Carver, different people. And they were basically biographical novels. And I enjoyed writing those. And even when I was in the fifth grade then, I tried to write a textbook on health. I had no idea what I was doing, but I did try. So I always knew that I wanted to write. I would say yes.
I love it. Listen, there is nothing wrong with having grand ambitions as a child. I remember my grandmother saying that it's like you do not try to put out the light of a child. You never do that. You just let them blossom and grow. You never know who you have as an adult. So it's like, yeah, I totally get that. Now, your book, Not Without a Fight. Did you have a particular prompting or motivation that said, now is the time to tackle this project and get this book out there?
Well, it was kind of interesting. I was helping a client with a civil rights case who happened to also be a distant cousin of mine. And we both had Bieberstein ancestry, and so we would often talk about our families. And he began telling me about his father, who was a resistance fighter in World War II Poland. And the more we talked, the more I became intrigued with the possibility of writing a biographical novel about him. I had written some in the past. And so eventually we decided to do that. And I met with his father on numerous occasions. He passed away in 2014, but I had opportunities to meet with him on many occasions and hear his story firsthand. So I think by that point we were ready to go with the book, and that's what we did.
I love how when something is meant for you, then it definitely is meant for you, and it happens, and it has such an amazing result. And I think that so many people want to know more. They want to understand everyone's story, and it just hits you so profoundly. So I can definitely understand that. Now, without giving it all away, because listeners, you know what I'm going to say, you have to purchase the book to get the ending. But D.W., can you tell us a little bit about what is the book about, or what will we learn having read it?
Okay. Well, I'll just give you just a short capsule summary. Cass Bieberstein was an 8-year-old Jewish boy living in Warsaw, Poland, when Germany invaded on September 1st, 1939. His family was very wealthy. They had a publishing company. They had a factory that made fine china. And then they had numerous real estate that they owned around the whole city of Warsaw. They lived in a mansion. They had several mansions and cottages throughout Poland. They had always talked about the possibility that Germany might invade, but they didn't really believe it would happen. So when the invasion occurred, they were actually at a hotel when the planes came in and started bombing, and they were caught off guard. After the invasion, they were forced from their mansion by Oskar Schindler and his team, who wanted to use the Bieberstein mansion to sell Jewish artifacts. So after being forced from the mansion, they were required to move from apartment to apartment until they were eventually forced into the Jewish ghetto. And that is where Cass met some members of the Jewish underground called Zob. And Cass knew how to use a rifle because his grandfather was a major in the Polish army. So he had taught Cass how to use a rifle. So by the age of 10, he was a sniper for the Jewish underground. And the book explores many of the events that took place during the war, leading up until the family was finally able to come to America after the war was over.
Oh, yes, that definitely sounds intriguing. Definitely sounds like something that you can curl up with and just kind of lose yourself in the book, that it's going to definitely pull you along the journey. I love that. Now, when you were writing the book, did you learn any new information about the Holocaust? Was it things that you kind of already knew, but this was just confirmation?
Well, I did. I knew about the Holocaust and I had studied it, but speaking to a Holocaust survivor and a resistance fighter to the extent that I did gave me tremendous insight that you won't find in the history books. Just to give you an example, the 1943 Jewish uprising began on April 19, and it lasted until May 16, not quite 30 days, but almost 30 days. What is interesting is when Germany first invaded, the Polish army was only able to surrender for about the same amount of time, just a little bit longer, just a few days longer. So what is amazing when you think about it is these Jews in the ghetto with almost no weapons were able to hold off a large part of the troop of the Nazi army, and the Nazis even had to bring in troops from the Eastern Front to help put down the resistance. And Cass always liked to say that what they did in the ghetto was far more reaching than what historians realized. It wasn't simply a little fight in the ghetto. It actually affected the war in his mind.
Yeah, it's amazing that when you, like you said, when you have an opportunity to speak to someone who is a survivor and you get their perspective, it is definitely far more than what we read in most books or the way that it's told to us. Yeah, I can imagine. Now, when you were working on the project itself, and you were writing, you were collaborating, you were finding editors and someone to do the cover and all of those things, how long did that process take you from start until finish?
Well, when I started it, I was actually working on another book at the same time. So I finished that book, and I think from the time I started this one until the time it was actually published was probably about 3 years. Ordinarily, it would take less time if I was working exclusively on one book, but given that I was doing two at the same time, it was about 3 years.
And I always ask, and there's of course no right or wrong answer, but how did you feel when you held your completed work in your hands and it was now available for the public to purchase? How did that moment feel to you?
Well, it was. It's actually my sixth book, so that just holding the book wasn't a significant thing, but because of the content, it was. Because of the content of the book, I felt that I had written something that was significant, and that was the pleasure that I had in receiving the finished copy.
And thank you so much for saying that, because there's someone else out there who says, yeah, I'm about to write my, next number book. I don't think I'm going to be as excited. But like you said, it's the content of the book. This is, I'm going to share this with the world. So definitely, thank you. Thank you for that bit of inspiration. Now, if I'm understanding correctly, are there 2 or 3 stories from the book that you could share that would give us a flavor of what the family actually went through? And if that's correct, I want to do that a little later in the program, but would you be able to do that?
I would. The book has a whole sequence of stories, actual stories that Cass told me, and I can select 3 or 4 of them and tell them to you fairly quickly. That'll give some idea about the book.
Great. Thank you so much, because we only have about a minute left in this part of the segment, and I don't want to rush you through that particular part of it. Now, for the ideal reader, would you say that this book is appropriate for a teen audience, or would you say for young adults and above, or is it 18 and over? Just because the story is so real and it is dealing with a bit of history that's so strong, is it okay for a younger teen to read it?
Well, I had originally thought that it's probably for 17, 18 and older because some of it is pretty traumatic. But what I found out, other people read it and they had the opposite feeling. They said, no, children need to read this book. People need to know it because it's true. And I actually had a teacher from the Los Angeles Unified School District contact me and tell me that she's using it in her high school class. So I think it's probably as long as children understand that things have happened in history that were not always good. I think it's probably suitable for maybe 10 and older.
Okay. Gotcha. And even what a great way to have discussion, a group read as a family, and to ask the child as you go, what do you think about that? Just to make sure that there's still that safety zone while still learning. And especially now that many of us are still dealing with COVID-19 and we're home and homeschooling. What a great way to mix a little bit of history and culture and all of that into our learning. I love it. Well, D.W., it is time for us to go to break. But before we do, can you please remind everyone, what is the title of your book? Where can we get a copy? And, of course, how do we stay in contact with you?
Okay. The book is Not Without a Fight, Polish Jews' Resistance, but the main title is Not Without a Fight, and the subtitle, A Polish Jews' Resistance. And it's available just about anywhere. Any bookstore can order if they don't have it in stock. Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, Walmart has it. So they can get it just about anywhere. If a person wants to try to reach me, I have my email address is Duke, D-U-K-E, at Duke, hyphen, like a minus sign, law, L-A-W.org. So it's Duke at Duke-law.org. and that's probably the best way to reach me.
Gotcha. Alrighty, listeners, now you know where you can get a copy of the book. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for our Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Chester, and my guest today is D.W.Duke. We're talking about his book, Not Without a Fight. I know, such an awesome title. I love it. Now, D.W., we were talking about this a little bit before we went to break, and that is some stories or bits that you could share to kind of, give a little sample, if you will, to our listeners today. If you like, would you like to share now, or would you like to share at the end of the broadcast?
Oh, sure, I'd be happy to share now.
Okay, yes, please.
Okay. One of the stories that was interesting, and I started a little bit telling about this earlier, but when Cass was a very young boy, his grandfather was a major in the Polish army, and he had taught Cass how to use a gun, how to use a rifle. So when the family was forced into the Jewish ghetto, Cass became a sniper for the Zab. At the age of 10, he was a sniper for the Jewish Combat Organization, which was part of the Jewish underground resistance. In the ghetto, he was assigned a task of working in a factory, and that was partly because of his family's influence before the war. He was able to work in a factory where they made guns and hand grenades. And now Cass's mother was brilliant. She had a PhD in chemistry and was always ahead of everybody else in thinking. What they discovered was that the Nazis would only inspect every 10th gun. And they wouldn't inspect all of the guns. So the Jews working in the factory began filing down the firing pins on some of the rifles so that after a few weeks in the field, it wouldn't shoot. It wouldn't discharge. The pin would break. And it was funny because the Nazis couldn't figure out what was happening, but they always assumed that it was a defect in the metal. So they blamed the factory where the smelting occurred, where they were making the steel for the rifle. And it never occurred to them that the Jewish people in the factory were actually doing it. They did the same thing with hand grenades. The hand grenades, the potato masher hand grenades that the Germans used, was supposed to have a 4.5-second fuse. And they would put a 1-second fuse on it, so before the soldier could even throw it, it would blow up. And the Nazis never figured out what was happening with that. They just assumed that that it wasn't thrown fast enough. So to Cass, in his mind, even way back at that point, before he ever even joined the underground, he was already fighting back. Another story that is really intriguing, and I think is important for people to understand. We have so much, fighting between religions and everything happening today. But there was a Christian family that befriended the Biebersteins before the war, and this was when anti-Semitism was building up in Poland. They had actually, one of their boys had picked on Cass because he was a Jewish boy. Then he and that boy became very good friends. But the families began socializing several years before the war, became very close friends, and then when the war started, this family helped them in many, many ways. For example, one time they wanted to smuggle the family out of the ghetto when they knew that the ghetto they were going to take everybody out and kill them. So the family, also a very wealthy family, repaired trucks for Nazis, for the Nazi soldiers. And they took a truck into the ghetto, and on each side of the truck, a big cargo truck, it had these beds for tools, these big, I guess you would call them like a chest where they would put tools, and it had a fake floor. So they put one family member on one side and then put the fake floor on top of her and put the tools in on top of that, and did the same thing on the other side with a different family member. And they were able to smuggle the entire family out of the ghetto out onto the other side in just a matter of days, with the exception of Cass. Cass, by that time, was working with the underground, and he didn't want to leave, so he stayed in the ghetto. Later on, when they were, Cass and his brother Thaddeus were running from some Nazi soldiers that were chasing them, they ran into a church. And the priest in that church was from the same family. And he had his sister was in there with him in the sanctuary. And he told the boys to hide under the altar. And they did. They got under the altar. The Nazis came in and put a gun up to the sister's head and told the priest, tell us where they're hiding. And the sister, he could see her mouth the word no, and he didn't. So tragically, they shot the girl in the head and killed her. But they didn't find the boys. But it was amazing how much this family did to help them in so many different ways. I'll just tell you one more interesting story. Toward the end of the war, when Russia invaded Poland from the east, Cass actually joined the Russian army. Not officially, but he just started working with them. Now, his grandfather by that time had gone to Russia and had joined the Russian army himself, was an officer, and it turned out that they knew who he was. So Cass became a spotter for the Russian army that was fighting Germany, and he would go up in a tree, about 20 feet into a tree with binoculars, and he would tell with a walkie-talkie, would tell the troops what was happening on the German side. And one day, apparently, they saw him, and he believes it was because of a reflection from his binoculars, but the Nazis saw him, and they shot the tree with an 88 millimeter gun, which is basically like a modern-day tank. And the tree broke and fell, and Cass fell from 20 feet, and in the fall, he fractured his hip. And so he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. But he was actually proud of that. That to him was a war injury, officially obtained, and he was always very proud of that. But those are just some of the kinds of the stories that the book has. It's just a chronological series of the events as it occurred in their lives. There's dozens of these kinds of stories in the book.
Oh yes, yeah. I love to already hear the stories from my grandmother's generation, just to hear the things that went on in their day-to-day life, but to hear about something like this, it shakes you in a different way, and it just reminds you of, like you said, there are some dark times in the history of the world, and that we need to make sure that those times are never repeated. So thank you so much for sharing that, and for reminding us of that. Wow, such amazing story. If I were Cass, I'd be proud too. Hey, I survived. and this, that's how I feel. I'm a breast cancer survivor. So if I could feel that way about that, then surely I could understand Cass's temperament. And it's like, yes, sir, I survived. I hear you. Now, what happened to Cass and his family after the war?
Well, they were stuck in Germany for a while. Poland for a while, and eventually they were able to get across the border within about I think about a year and a half after the war ended. They were able to get across the border, and they made it to Switzerland. And then a group there in Switzerland helped them escape to the United States. Now, their father had already come over. The plan originally, right when the war broke out, the father left and came to the United States with plans of getting his family out, but he was not able to do that because they lost the war. They had thought that Poland might actually win. So he was stuck in the United States, and they were there in Poland. But the entire family was finally able to get out. They got to the United States, and now picture Cass, just a young teenager who had just spent 6 years of his life under Nazi domination, and he was Jewish. And you can imagine how, in his mind, everyone was a Nazi. Everyone at school, everyone everywhere in the United States. He thought they were just people pretending not to be Nazis. And so he was constantly getting in fights and was having trouble. So they sent him to Canada to live with his Uncle Bernie, who had come over earlier as well. And, of course, Canadian people, you know how friendly they are. They worked on Cass, and they made him into a gentleman, basically. But that's what it took. He went there, and then he went to college and became studied aeronautics and so on. But it took that to kind of get him to rethink and realize that not everyone is a Nazi. In fact, he changed his name from Bieberstein to Biebers, because he thought if people heard Bieberstein, they would know he's Jewish, but Biebers they would not. So he was he was afraid of what people would do to his family if they found out that he was Jewish.
Mm-hmm. It is just amazing the things that when we hear the stories that individuals and families had to do in order to survive, and it just blows you away. So it's just something as simple as that. And he was probably right. If he hadn't changed it, someone probably would have said something, but it is a shame that he had to do that just in order to survive. Just wow, just the whole mental anguish that you go through just trying to make sure that your family is going to be okay. Now,
sure.
I want to ask you a question that perhaps is something that you found in your research and in the storytelling, or just is opinion. If you have a little bit of both, that's okay too. And that is about the Holocaust itself. Did you ever come across any opinion or any fact as to what caused the Holocaust? Like, was there one particular thing that happened that made the Holocaust begin? And do you think that something as atrocious could happen even in today's society?
Yes. I'm glad you asked that question, because it really is possible, and it could even happen. I used to think it could never happen in America, but I don't believe that anymore. I believe something like this could occur here again. We have just gotten so bizarre. But the Jews had been persecuted for centuries. Going way back until the first were taken to Babylon. And they had always been persecuted from that time forward. The persecution was very intense in Europe, and if there was the movie Fiddler on the Roof gives you an example of what they would go through. It was just a very difficult time for them. And after World War I, the Treaty of Versailles and all of these things were developing. Germany had to pay extremely high reparations far higher than they could. It was breaking their economy, and the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion was a false document that was published by people who wanted to basically blame the Jews for all the problems of the world and accuse them of trying to take over the world. And so, armed with that information, Hitler was able to caused the German people initially to believe that the Jews were the problem, the cause of all their problems. So they started doing things, wouldn't let them teach in universities, eventually wouldn't let them have their schools. It just went on, and they saw it coming. They saw it coming for throughout the 30s. It was happening. And a lot of them would try to decide what to do. Do they leave, and so on? But it was the ability to take somebody who's different for some reason. In this case, based on not just religion, but just their biological origin, their who they were genetically, and use that against them, and then basically just try to with genocide destroy them and wipe them off the planet. That was the goal of Adolf Hitler. But I think it was just they needed a scapegoat, and it was that ability that probably brought Hitler to power. He was able to identify, these are the people causing our problems. We need to take care of that, and the German people went with it.
Wow, because it's so interesting that we read about it and we say, there's no way this could ever happen. Like, how in the world did they get to this point? But people, you just never know when you're dealing with people. what's going to happen there. Now, I believe that out of every horrible thing that happens, that we can glean a lesson, that there is something that we can hold on to try to prevent that from happening again. Are there any lessons from the Holocaust that you can think of that you believe would be beneficial for us today? I understand, it's a different generation, it's a different country, and all of that. But do you think that there's anything that we could take and hold on to today?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems is we just touched on it a little bit, is identity politics. When and what you said is so true. I mean, I'm seeing things in the United States today that I never thought I would see. I'm seeing a level of hostility just between people because of different political views that I thought was way past this. I never thought we would see this in America today, and in large part, it is attributable to identity politics. And what that is whenever you have something that is considered a burden to society, or in some cases they simply want to create an image that it's a burden when it's not even real. They will use identity politics and try to find some way for distinguishing between people, and then you get the us versus them, and the them are the bad people with this type of identity politics. And I do believe that it's happening right now in the United States. The political polarization is so intense that people are ready to come to blows. And this is what we need to try to fix this. We need to try to fix it. We need to try to fix it fairly quickly because it's way out of control. But yeah, I would say that's the number one thing is avoiding the identity politics. That's often how they get in there, and then just a debased lack of morality will lead to this kind of situation. When you have no value for human life, the way the Nazis did, it was easy to over time to push this onto the people, and you start defining certain people as, well, that person's not really a human. Like in the United States in the Dred Scott decision back in 1857, the United States Supreme Court said black people are not human beings. Well, they were doing the same kind of thing in Germany at the time. It was not necessarily that they were not human beings, that they are kind of subhuman and not worthy of being called a human being. And that was how they got around to that. They did the same thing with the mentally ill and physically handicapped. So those are two of the biggest things that happen, I think, that lead to this type of crisis.
Thank you so much for bringing all of that up and making it current for especially our younger listeners who may not be familiar at all. They don't understand why their aunts and uncles, or their parents are saying, oh my goodness, no, look at the trajectory that we're on. This is not good. They haven't lived through it. They don't know. So thank you for reminding them of that. And while you were talking, it made me think about, and my listeners have heard me say this before, Dr. Maya Angelou has a beautiful line that she shared, and she says, we are more alike, my friend, than we are unalike. And in that, I held on to that because it makes me understand that though we may look different on the outside, on the inside, there are so many things that we want that are the same. We want to be loved. We want, our kids to be okay. We want to be safe in our homes. Just very, very basic things that really and truly do bind us. And I think when we look down at our foundation, regardless of your race, color, creed, nationality, religious beliefs, you want to be treated like a human being, and I have to agree with you on everything that you said. What an amazing thing that you have shared with us today. I love the reminders. Thank you so much, D.W., for that. Now, I have one last question for you, and I could talk about this so much more. Being a multicultural person myself, I love talking about history and how it has shaped us into the people that we are, but also those warning signs that we need to look out for. So thank you for coming on and sharing. So my last question for you is you kind of mentioned before that you have other books. So does that mean that we should expect future books from you as well? Or are there one or two more books in you, or do you think that this is it?
Actually, I've got quite a few books. I'm working on 3 right now. And again, they are stories, historical events that I've created into a novel. And so when you do that, your outline's already set by the parameters of history. So you know where you're headed with the end, but so many of these stories the public have never heard. And so what I do, I write these biographical novels because, like I mentioned, they were so influential to me when I was a child that I think it's a wonderful way to teach history that people actually enjoy, as opposed to sitting down and reading a history book, and learning on such and such a date this happened. Weave it into a story with dialogue and events and try to make it as real as possible, try to make it as true to the actual story as possible. And the public understands, this is a biographical novel, and that's why I like to write them. So, yes, I do have one involving the Jim Crow laws, what happened in the United States. I have another involving a fellow that was held in captivity in Nigeria for 6 months with some other, they were contract workers. And so, yeah, I've got several that are happening.
Oh, yes. Well, let me go on and just put this out on air. When you are done, you are definitely welcome back. I have watched some programs about the people that are the contractors that are captured in some of these other countries, and boy, the stories, you go, there's no way. I can't imagine this happening to me or someone that I know, but yet it is happening far more than people realize. So you most definitely have an open invitation to come back and share about any of your books with us anytime. D.W.Duke, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this book with us today. Before I let you go, if you could please remind everyone of the title of your book. Where can we get a copy? Of course, how do we stay in contact with you?
Okay. Again, It's Not Without a Fight. That's the main title. Subtitle, A Polish Jew's Resistance. So It's Not Without a Fight, A Polish Jew's Resistance. It's available. Any bookstore can order it if they don't have it in stock. Amazon.com is where I buy most of my books today, so that's the one I usually recommend to people. And if anybody needs to reach out to me for any reason, my email is duke@duke- and again, that's like a minus sign, law.org. duke@duke-law.org.
Thank you again for being on the show.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for being a great host.
Thank you. And listeners, thank you as well for spending time with us today. As always, may the Lord continue to shine His face upon you. May you receive His grace and His mercy in all that you do. Until next time, everyone, remember that you are blessed in the Lord. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.